We're going to be talking about part 2 of Nudge, and that's money and health. And for this section, there are 3 different lessons that I would like you to take from it. So before we get into presentations, I'd like to offer 3 important takeaway lessons from this portion of Nudge, part 2 on money and part 3 on health. The first regards how the authors structure their argument in line with the stock issues, the rules for arguing that we discussed in our last class. The second lesson offers examples of realistic, simple, and effects-driven protocols for motivating change. The third concerns a brief criticism of Nudge and makes an argument as to why we might want to push back against its authors. First, the stock issues. Thaler and Sunstein do a particularly good job of organizing their arguments in a way that corresponds neatly with the categories that we discussed in our previous class. They do so by powerfully articulating their case for the status quo. Take, for instance, their argument from Chapter 6. We can perhaps infer the following thesis or resolution. The United States federal government should strongly incentivize the adoption of Save More Tomorrow plans and other gentle nudges like automatic enrollment to encourage saving among Americans. And here I've taken his argument, or their argument, and I've tried to put it into a format that resembles the stock issues that we talked about the last time. So if you'll remember, I'll just run through these definitions again very quickly. The status quo refers to the current state of affairs, or the way that things currently are. So every time that you introduce a debate resolution, it's there to adjust the status quo, or to introduce a policy to improve some current condition. Then you have the resolution, or the topicality, which is this statement, which I've pieced together. I did not take that directly from the textbook. Then harms and impacts. Harms are the things that are wrong with the status quo. Impacts are the consequences of those harms, or the why they matter, or who cares, so what, how you answer those sorts of questions about the harm. So harm is what is wrong. Impact is the consequence, the downstream effect for the people that would be affected. Inherent barriers are the reasons why people haven't already taken it upon themselves to fix this problem. And we talked about 3 different kinds last time: structural, attitudinal, and existential. And then plan. Plan refers to the steps that you intend to take in order to move forward with your policy. And then solvency refers to how your plan will remedy the status quo, as well as how it will reverse harms and get around the inherent barriers that you've set up. So in this case, the status quo is, fourfold, right? I said that they set up a very powerful case for the status quo. First, personal savings is at a dramatic and historical low. They make a comparison to the 1930s as to how long ago it was that Americans' personal savings rates were this low. And they're saying that something must be done because we haven't been in this position since the Great Depression. Then they also talk about what already exists out there in the status quo. There are IRAs and 401ks, but even if those plans are out there that you can acquire through companies typically, people don't end up taking advantage of it, and that seems like a natural shortcoming of the system. Third, the costs of saving too little are significantly greater or outweigh the costs of saving too much. So even if we have to force people to save, it's going to be better for them in the long term, because not having enough money for retirement is far worse than having too much. And then finally, and this comes at the very end of the chapter, they talk about the Pension Protection Act. Those things combined set up the status quo because this is the way currently that things are. These are the state of affairs that we have to deal with and that we have to modify productively into the future. Then they give 2 harms. First, Social Security is not solvent, and the consequence of that is going to be some combination of tax increases or benefit cuts. Then they also say that defined benefit programs, which are by and large the majority of the programs that we have available to us, Social Security is supposed to be an example of a defined benefit plan. Defined benefit plans privilege stable jobs, but unfortunately, employees who change jobs frequently will not end up with a lot of benefits when they retire. So at this point we have 2 harms, 2 impacts, both what's wrong and also what's the impact, the consequence, the downstream effect of that. Then we have inherent barriers. Why isn't it that people are already solving this problem themselves? One, because there's a false assumption out there that people can solve complex math problems, and the truth of it is that people can't. And second, there's an assumption that people have enough willpower to save for themselves. But again, truth is that they cannot. So you can call these attitudinal barriers if you want. They are psychological barriers in some way on the part of the people who you want to urge to save more. Finally, you have the plan and the solvency, and there are three parts to the plan, and this takes up the bulk of the chapter. You'll notice that all of what I've said here takes place within the first 3 pages, if not 4 pages of the chapter. So status quo, harms, inherent barriers, all of those are within the first 4 pages. The remainder of the chapter deals with plan, which is first automatic enrollment, then the Save More Tomorrow plan, and then finally government incentives to encourage employers to adopt these Save More Tomorrow plans. And then I just provided a quotation that tries to summarize the kind of impact or the large positive advantage that this plan will have for the people that are involved. And the way that they prove that is by drawing on a case study that allowed them to use a Save More Tomorrow plan with automatic enrollment, which had dramatically better results than the majority of 401ks or IRAs. So when you're thinking about the stock issues, I'd like you to also be trying to put those terms back onto Nudge in order to know not only how to adopt certain arguments and put them into your own debates, but also to see how they're structuring their arguments in a way that strongly resembles how you should be structuring your debate arguments as well. Are there any questions about that first part? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Can you scroll back up, please? The words on the left-hand side, status quo, harm, impact, harm, are those words you just chose, or are those a technical?
Those are technical terms,
okay.
Right? So we talked about 3 argument structures that over the course of the semester we would be using, and really in that class period when we talked about those, we only got through 2. So the stock issues are the 3rd argument structure. They are the 3rd way that I'm encouraging you to put together a policy debate, and when you end up going to your issue debate, these are going to be similar to the main points that you would use when you're presenting. You would present your introduction would present both the status quo and the resolution, for instance. Your main point 1 would present the harms and the impacts. Main point 2 would present inherent barriers, and main point 3 might present plan and solvency. Other questions? Okay. Second, a good way to strengthen your own arguments is to offer surprising and novel evidence. Thaler and Sunstein do this to great effect when, for instance, they describe rules of thumb and construct realistic solutions from them. For example, the choice architects, the authors, make the claim that humans are predictable choice makers. A great example of this is the diversification or the 1/n rule, a kind of knee-jerk response on the part of consumers to think that investing their money across different mutual funds is always a good strategy. So you think about the rules of thumb, the heuristics that they provided in the initial part of the book. These are, the concrete example that they're providing here is the idea that you must diversify. If you're investing, you must have real estate, and you must have stocks, and you must have some sort of secure bonds. And you have to divide your money equally among those different categories. But the truth of the matter is that that's not always a good reaction, even though it is kind of instinctive, that the more pots that our money is in, the better off that we're going to be. So here's their own evidence for it. Naive diversification in portfolio selection can have more significant consequences on what people do, on how much money they end up having. In a revealing study, university employees were asked how they would invest their retirement money if they had just 2 funds to choose from. In one condition, one of the funds invested entirely in stocks, the other in bonds. Most of the participants chose to invest their money half and half, achieving an asset allocation of 50% stocks. Another group was told that one fund invested entirely in stocks and another balanced fund invested half in stocks and half in bonds. People in this group could have also invested 50% of their money in stocks by putting all their money into a balanced fund. Instead, they ended up following the 1/n rule and divided their money evenly between the 2 funds, ending up with mostly stocks. People in a third group were given the choice between a balanced fund and a bond fund. You can guess what they did. At the bottom of this, what this means is that people don't know the difference between stocks and bonds, or what the difference between a balanced portfolio and a non-balanced portfolio, and the default for them is going to be to allocate money equally across those different areas, right? In order to make sure that they're the safest possible. But like they say, this can end up doing more harm than good. The reason why I think that this is a good way to strengthen your own arguments is because this gives you two kind of interesting insights. First, regarding the kinds of choices that you structure in the debate itself. So if the authors recommend that options be structured in a way to anticipate consumers' knee-jerk reactions, the same should be true of the options that you offer in your own debates. Offering a range of plausible options is a good way to hedge against your co-arguers' claims and involve a wide array of listeners. Okay. The other part of it is to think about the fact that people in general are going to want to hedge their bets. So when you're addressing your audience, you also want to keep that in mind as well. So in other words, if they can agree with both you and the negative, if you're putting forward a policy resolution, people will. If you give them that opportunity, they'll try and take a middle ground between you and your co-arguer. So in the debate, part of your job is to articulate clearly why your position is the superior one. Finally, I want to encourage us to push back against the authors as we move into our discussion. It is absolutely the case that for some of us, myself included, the information is important and personally mind-blowing. As someone who received their first student loan payment receipts at the beginning of this semester, like a lot of this stuff is kind of an interesting awakening. Why isn't it that I haven't been saving money the entire time I've been in college and so forth? So a lot of that information I think is interesting and useful, and it gives me at least a good vocabulary for thinking through finances that otherwise as a communication studies person I wouldn't necessarily have. So I do believe that the solutions that Thaler and Sunstein offer are well defended. Even so, I wonder about two aspects of the recommendations that they make. First, we can't all be choice architects, and the temptation among us status-seeking humans is that we all want to be number one. The setting of a debate allows us to test choice architecture and perhaps even allows us to perfect it. But one of the major behavioral obstacles to implementing such changes is the desire to be the person who is in charge. So in other words, there's this conception of people as these animals, right? These choice-making animals that are predictable, that do things in a knee-jerk fashion. But the problem with that is that people don't like to imagine themselves that way. They like to imagine themselves as the choice architect, as the masters of their own destiny. And there's no place for that within this vision of choice architecture. The second thing is that I think we need to think about how the authors define the word choice. Choice seems to reflect the specific behavior of humans, a tendency to make decisions, as Zarefsky says, in a knee-jerk fashion. Part of what bothers me is that the idea of a nudge doesn't encourage us to make better arguments. It just shapes certain knee-jerk reactions so we can do the least harm to ourselves. Any questions? Any follow-up?
I feel like it kind of distances them from the audience.
It
feels like it's just like humans are idiots.
Yeah.
And they need to be protected, as opposed to this is how you protect yourself if you need someone to protect you.
I feel like this is something I have to be very careful about in general, just with my own life, right? This is the ivory tower criticism in a lot of ways. It's that they are making these social, scientific judgments about the way that people behave, but they're doing it, like you said, in such a way that they're totally distanced from it. They're separate from it. They're not involved in those people's lives. In fact, they have a pretty negative opinion of what those people are capable of doing.
Interesting. Reading it, I think, and people are talking about are so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it's me, you know what I mean? I think that I'm so smart. I am not the people they're referring to. They're referring to the others. When in reality they were probably saying referring to me as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that that's a big obstacle to adopting the plan, right? It's like, yes, useful information. Thank you for giving it to me. But at the same time, now that I've read this information, I can be a choice architect and I don't have to be a human, right? Like that's an issue because at some level they want us all to act like humans, and if that were the case, then all of our monetary and health-related concerns would be okay.
A better push would be for them to encourage people to think like econs occasionally.
Yeah.
As opposed to putting it as a status that can't be attained. It's like, well, these are what econs do, but that's not realistic. No one can do that.
No, I think that that's right. I think that there needs to be a place for that sort of rational reflection too. I mean, you need to be able to. I'm stronger for managing my household finances over just leaving them in jars randomly, right? Like they say in the book. So I think that you need to be able, they mention education loosely, but it's not foregrounded enough. There needs to be more econ-centered thinking too, I think. So I'm in complete agreement with you guys. All right, so presentations. Who's going first today? Okay, very cool. Do you have a handout? Okay, awesome. Well, I'll turn off the camera and we'll get started.